Welcome to this episode of The Build-Up, presented by the Florida Home Builders Association, serving up fresh perspectives on politics, building, and beyond.
Everyone, welcome to The Build-Up. I'm your host, Ryan Benson, president of the Florida Home Builders Association and the co-owner of A. Vernon Allen Builder in Naples and Sanibel.
Hey, good morning. I'm John Riddle. I'm the co-host. I am vice president of Turning Leaf Custom Homes. We're a custom builder based in Sanford and building throughout Central Florida. Ryan, I've got to tell you, I am really looking forward to this conversation today. Doing my research, I understand that you guys are college buddies, so maybe there's some legendary stories we might hear.
I've been really looking forward to this one as well. So this is my good friend, our senator for Lee County, Jonathan Martin. John and I have known each other since college, but start with taking us back to before we met, growing up in Fort Myers, and how you got into politics and law.
So I grew up in West Palm as a kid, and then right before high school, my mom, my brother, and I moved over to Fort Myers and started at Fort Myers High School, played basketball, got involved in McGregor Baptist Church, and really fell in love with the West Coast versus the East Coast. I think I was old enough when I left West Palm to understand that what was going on over there was just not the best place to raise a family for what I envisioned. And so looking down the road, even when I was in high school, I thought that Fort Myers, Southwest Florida, was going to be a great place to move back to after school. But I started just, going to church, paying attention to what was going on. Back then, Bill Clinton was our president, and there was a lot of Democrat president, Republican Senate, Republican House. Newt Gingrich was the Speaker of the House. That was just the time period that I grew up in. And then, of course, all the scandals that went on with Bill Clinton. But I read the paper every day, and even in high school, just started paying attention to opinions and what was going on in local politics. And I became really, really aware of the fact that there's a lot of people out there making decisions that affect my life. I was going to the county public schools, and the school board made decisions that affected what I was learning in the classroom or what my friends were learning. And I was like, man, this is really important to pay attention to what's going on in politics, but also if you don't get involved, someone else is going to make decisions that affect your life. So having that background, when it was time to go to college, I wanted to go to a college here in Florida that had a really good political science department, and so I chose Stetson University, and that's where Ryan and I met. We actually met doing student government back at Stetson. I became student government president, and we remained friends ever since. And I decided I want to go to law school. I went to law school at Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia. And when I graduated, I came back to Fort Myers. I planned on working in real estate development, doing some sort of construction, but the economy was starting to slow down. And so I actually found myself looking at the state attorney's office website and didn't really even know what a prosecutor was, but went for an interview, and they decided to hire me within a couple days of that interview. And I fell in love with trial work and helping people and keeping my community safe. And I also started getting involved with the Republican Party in Lee County right after I graduated from law school as well. So continuing with the idea that if I don't get involved, someone else is going to make decisions that affect my life, so I might as well have a seat at the table. And I think that's kind of where it started.
So I remember working with you when you were with the Republican Party. There was also the first run for House, and that's when you decided to actually go for elected office. What made you want to go for elected office for the House? And by the way, it was not successful because we were working together on his campaign, and we did not win. But what made you take that jump into elected politics?
So since this is your podcast, I'll blame you. You're the reason. I was just minding my own business, and all of a sudden Ryan said, you should run for this office. No, it's something that we had obviously talked about for years, eventually, running for office, but when's the right time? And I think we hear these stories about people who are just, they'd be great in office, but sometimes you never know, like somebody's niece is going to run to replace them, or they start having a family, and so we kind of joke about politics or getting elected to political offices, 90% opportunity and 10% skill or experience, and I think that's kind of true. So there's a lot of things that have to line up. There's a lot of supporters that have to be on your side. Whether it's grassroots, whether it's fundraising, all those have to be clicking on all cylinders in order to have a successful campaign. So I was 30 years old. I was a prosecutor. It was 2012. I actually was working every single day out in Glades County, and then running for a seat that I lived in Fort Myers. And it was an open primary. There were 3 individuals that were running in that race. Myself, Dave Mullica, who's now a county commissioner and now actually married to Jenna Persons, who replaced the person who ultimately won that seat, which was Heather Fitzenhagen. So there, it's a small world, but there's, I learned a lot in that race, and I was very thankful to have your support. You threw my first fundraiser. There's people that I met at that fundraiser that I still know. There was a random lawyer that you brought to the fundraiser who's now a circuit judge.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's great.
There's so many connections that were made during that campaign, and what I learned through that campaign was, even if you think you're going to lose, like, use it as an opportunity. You get free invites to speak to people that you would never speak to. You get to share your ideas. So even if you don't win, you're still putting ideas out there that oftentimes your opponents are going to have to deal with when they get into office. And you don't have to win to make a difference. But I think we did it the right way. And even though we could have launched bombs and gone negative, we didn't. We stayed positive, and as a result, 2 years later, I ended up the head of the Lee County Republican Party, which is, I'd argue, the best Republican executive committee back then in the entire country.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a great group, really solid. You were there when the Senate seat opened up, and tell us about how it came about for you becoming our senator. What events took place in order for that to happen midterm?
Yeah, so the Senate seat had just been won by Representative and now Senator Ray Rodriguez, and Ray Rodriguez served in the Florida House. He actually was running for another Lee County state rep seat in 2012 when I was running. So I met him on the campaign trail, got to hear him a lot, met his family, and the person who beat me in 2012, Representative Fitzenhagen, ended up running for the Senate seat against Representative Rodriguez in 2020. And I think they spent over $1 million a piece, maybe closer to $2 million.
Okay.
It was an incredible amount of money. There were TV ads everywhere. You remember?
I remember the campaign. Yeah.
I remember the campaign, and because I was the Republican Party chair in Lee County, and it was a Republican primary, and it's one of those situations where, the Florida Senate, I think, had sided with Representative Rodriguez, but there were some other very large money backers that were supporting Representative Fitzenhagen in that race, and they ended up going at it in the primary, and of course all the political fights in Southwest Florida take place in the primaries because the Democrats just don't have the chance to win anything here. So after that primary win from Representative Rodriguez, he walked into the Senate seat very easily in the general election. Well, his first 2 years in the Senate, he spent basically living on an island. Figuratively speaking, he was the reapportionment or the redistricting chair in the Senate. So every 10 years, the U.S. has a census, and then once we get those numbers in 2020, 2021, Florida then has to reapportion all their districts and all their Senate seats, their state House seats, and then their congressional seats. So Senator Rodriguez actually served in that role as chairing that committee. So he basically went off the grid. There's a lot of litigation around these, so he just basically cut communication with a lot of people and just studied maps and population trends. And you got to give him a lot of credit for drawing districts that led to the supermajority in the Florida House, the Florida Senate, and us being able to take back the House in D.C. because of those additional Republican seats that came to Florida. So he did a phenomenal job. So as the election was getting close, as he was getting close to running for re-election in 2022, because every senator has to run for election in that first year after reapportionment and redistricting. Every House member, of course, runs every 2 years, but the senators are usually running staggered years. They have 4-year seats, so the odd number districts will run, for example, in 2024, like I did. The even number districts will run in 2026 for 4-year seats, but in that 2022, or that 2 year, every decade, everybody gets reset, and so every senator runs for re-election. Well, I just had my third kid right before the qualifying period comes up, and I'm aware of the qualifying period because I'm the party chair in the county, so I know that everyone's gearing up to run for vacant seats, and Senator Rodriguez had done such a great job. Everybody's expecting him to go back in. We had another senator that represented part of Lee County, Senator Pasadoma, who was moving in to be the Senate president. And then the on deck Senate President, Senator Albritton, represented another part of Lee County based on those new districts that were drawn up. So we were looking to have a very strong Senate class. There was a brand new House seat that had just been created in Lee County. Representative Esposito was jumping into that race. And, there was a lot of movement, mostly in school board races, because that's where a lot of the post-COVID political activism.
Yeah, it was very contentious at that time. The school board thing was huge. Those races became a big deal. Remember
Exactly.
that.
And those are tricky too as a Republican Party chair because they're nonpartisan races. So you have these individuals who say they're Republican, but they don't really have to run in a Republican primary. And so the rules affecting who those individuals or who you're allowed to support from the party side are very tricky. So I was more dealing with those issues, and it was about a week before qualifying. Actually, it was less than a week before qualifying started. It was about 4 days before qualifying started. And qualifying is a 1 week process where you turn in your paperwork if you want to run for a state seat or any office. There's a 1 week window to get your documents signed, fill out your financial disclosures, you designate a treasurer, designate a bank depository, and start your campaign. Or officially file for your campaign, and many campaigns start years before that. So we're about 4 or 5 days before the qualifying period opens where you can start turning in your paperwork, and I learned that Senator Ray Rodriguez was possibly going to become the chancellor of the state university system. And so I started working with some people close to Governor DeSantis' team, and or who are in Governor DeSantis' team, very close to the governor. And they were looking to fill that spot and make sure that whoever was going to replace Ray Rodriguez in the Senate had very similar principles to Senator Rodriguez and also to the governor. And that's when I first learned about the opening. And yeah, it was really, really fast. The process went really, really fast. And about 4 days later, I was talking to the governor, and he's like, "All right, so we're going to do this." And basically got off the phone and had a team lined up and ready to go, filed my paperwork. And by the time Friday rolled around, there was another individual from here in Lee County that had attempted to file but didn't fill out all her paperwork properly and failed to qualify according to the Secretary of State. So I ended up running against a write-in candidate for my first election cycle, which was a blessing. I was able to raise money, didn't have to spend a whole lot. And went in and started serving at the end of 2022. Became the chair of criminal justice my first session, which was great because of my background as a prosecutor. I was able to hit the ground running with a topic that I was very comfortable with and that mattered a lot, not just to my constituents, but also around the state of Florida.
So I'm guessing, Senator, you were successful in your first campaign, so Ryan was not part of that campaign effort?
I'd have to go back and see how supportive he was in this campaign. I'd have to go look at the Secretary of State filings, but he's always been very emotionally supportive of my political successes and failures.
And that's important also. Yeah, we need to have emotional support. So, chair of the Criminal Justice Committee, you're in and you start in 22. How soon before you're appointed chair? How does that process work? That committee?
So it's basically it's selected by the Senate president.
Oh, okay.
And what's unique about the Senate, and this was a unique situation going into the Senate as well, where we had a supermajority in the Senate and in the House. The governor, of course, had come off that huge victory that we hadn't seen. We hadn't seen a margin of victory that large ever.
Yeah.
As far as net votes, percentage votes. I think it had been, 20 or 30 years since any candidate had won by such a large percentage. I think you have to go back to when the Democrats were running things. So we had a massive amount of support, but in the Senate, you have an opportunity from your very first year. Usually senators will come through the House, and they serve in the House for 4 to 6 to 8 years, depending on when that spot opens up in their Senate race. Mm-hmm. And they'll jump in and they'll have experience as running a committee in the House before they come to the Senate. But everybody in the Senate who's part of the majority party generally has a committee that they share. And the Criminal Justice Committee is a really important committee. I mean, we deal just the phone calls I was getting, the bills I was running. I'm in very close communication with the Attorney General, the Sheriff's Association, the Governor's Office, the police unions, FDLE, the state troopers, Department of Corrections. I mean, you set the policy for a massive amount of statutes that matter to a lot of people.
Right.
So serving as chair in that committee from the very beginning was an honor. I was very humbled to have that opportunity. But man, we got a lot done that first year, even the second year. I mean, we can talk about some of those bills, but they were bills that had not been passed in our country in 100 years.
Wow.
So it was humbling to be a part of something that big.
Yeah. Do you find, you mentioned earlier that most senators start a pathway as a representative. Do you find that, I know you're since 22, but how do you think that helps you, or maybe does it hinder you that you didn't have that pathway with your role in the Senate?
I don't think it helped or hindered either way. I think it gave me a different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I think I had, I kind of joke with some of my Senate friends who went through the House, and the way that, and you can see it playing out in politics right now, as far as when the Speaker of the House says to do something, if you're in that party, you better do it.
Mm.
In the Senate, you're given, I won't say given, the structure doesn't expect you to follow the leader as closely as in the House. And some lobbyists refer to the House as like a military structure. There's a general, and then everybody else follows in line. And in the Senate, the lobbyists will refer to the senators as Somali warlords. Basically, you have your own kingdom, you have your own money, you have your own soldiers. You can make things happen, whether it's causing a problem or supporting a good cause independently. And so you have the ability to do things. And that's, I've heard some other expressions where the Senate is where good bills go to die, meaning the House can push legislation through, but a couple individual senators can derail that bill very, very easily.
Oh, okay.
And it happens a lot. So you need to make sure that something, and I think it's a very important part of the process. I'm a very small government minded person. Like, we shouldn't be changing the law, or laws are designed to protect our God-given constitutional rights. If you're going to change a law, then there better be a really good reason to change a law. And I think that process, having that autonomy in the Senate, ensures that if this law is not going to benefit a lot of people by protecting their God-given constitutional rights, then you better figure out how to make it pass, because there's 3 or 4 people in the majority party that could side with the minority, or that could just kind of put some amendments on the bill that are going to make people think twice about it, and then it would cause the bill to die if it's going to be a bad bill. So I would joke with my House members or my senator friends who came through the House, and they say, "Man, the Senate's so great over here. I have autonomy. I can do things." And I didn't have that perspective.
Right.
Of coming through the House, so my first thought was, how bad is the House? Because man, you're voting on a lot of very important issues, and because of our compressed session, you have 60 days to put something on the table and basically get it done. There's not a whole lot of opportunity for amendments. If you don't see the bill coming through your committee, there's not a lot of opportunity to have conversations with other members or staff or lobbyists or stakeholders, because your schedule's slammed.
Right.
So you don't have the opportunity sometimes, because of those time constraints, to make a decent bill really good, or to make a bad bill decent. You have to, sometimes if you want to get your bills passed, you have to kind of suck it up and build an alliance with those Somali warlords that you share office space with, and let them know that you'll support their ideas if they support your ideas. So So being in the role, you're still a legislator. I don't really say I'm one of 40. I say I'm one of 28, because that's how many Republicans we have, and that basically is a supermajority. that controls the pace and the topics of bills that we propose, but that's still 27 other legislators that I have to work with in the Senate to get something across the finish line. So not everything that I think is a great idea is voted favorably. Not every one of my favorable votes do I think that it's the best single vote ever. So you're constantly wrestling with that. Am I moving the ball forward? Or are we moving backwards? Definitely vote no on something that you think is going to harm your community or harm your state. But if a bill's not perfect, don't let perfection be the enemy of success or progress. So
Good point.
it's still tough. There's no easy vote up there. Even my own bills. I mean, sometimes I get to the end, I'm like, man, I really wish I would have amended this. But if I amend it now, it's going to kill it in the House, or the governor is going to veto it. So there's even my own bill. I think anybody, if they're honest with themselves, is going to say that nothing is perfect, because if I'm the judge of perfection, then I'm missing out on a whole lot of other perspectives that people in Florida elected to be heard.
So let's talk about property tax.
Oh yeah.
So a huge topic, or it was at the beginning of session.
Because I filed that bill.
Because you filed it, Bill 852, to do the study on property tax. We're interested in what could that look like? Like how, I know the bill was to do a study, but how can you eliminate property tax and make up that money elsewhere?
Right.
That's a great question. So I think that's why I filed a bill to do a study first, instead of saying this is what we're going to do. So this is a topic that I got to give a lot of credit to Representative Chamberlain out of Ocala. He's relatively new to the House. He kind of got a bonus seat, filled a vacancy that was created about a year and a half ago in the House. So he's I think he's actually, I want to say he's a home builder. He's a very free market thinking person, and when he proposed this identical bill last year in the House, it got zero traction. No one was even talking about it. But I talked to him before session started this year, and I said, hey, this is a good thing. Like, we just need a study. I'd actually tried to get a study done before filing a bill, and hey, let's just have some people look at this in the state of Florida, crunch the numbers and figure out what the feasibility is. Because I think we've heard a lot from the governor and from a lot of individuals who say that, a property tax isn't necessarily like unconstitutional. We're okay with funding our government. We're not anarchists. We might be small government Republicans, but we still believe the government has a role to do something. But let's talk about the collection of money now instead of just the spending of money, which we've done such a good job of tackling in the state of Florida for decades. So let's talk about the collection of money. What's the most equitable way to collect money from individuals, and what's the purpose of the collection of money? And I think if you look at a lot of the harm that our government tries to mitigate, protect us from, a lot of that harm is caused when people leave their property, when they go somewhere else. If I'm traveling to the store to buy groceries and I get in a car crash, the fire trucks come, the ambulance comes. If we want to eliminate car crashes, we build safer roads with better lights and wider rights of way. If we want kids not going to hit crossing the road, we build better crosswalks and safer sidewalks. Those are things that happen after you leave your property that the government's responsible for. So if I'm leaving my property, maybe that's when we should be taxing, because that's when government's supposed to step in. Especially, you guys are in the home building business. The government has a lot of rules and regulations put in place before you can even put a shovel in the ground to make sure that the home and all the activities in the home are not going to spill over outside of the home, or that there's going to be appropriate, whether it's drainage, whether it's easements to get electricity there, whether it's sewage. I mean, that's all taken care of ahead of time. So what are we really paying for?
And we pay for that when we build it too. We're
Exactly.
paying impact fees, and so those are costs that are burdened to the builder, and then the consumer
permitting
ultimately
fees,
permitting fees, inspections,
Yep.
and then the consumer has paid for all those when they acquire their property.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about supporting an ongoing government, like what activities are actually causing the government to have to step in? And I think a lot of those activities involve spending money, whether it's at the movies or do people go to movies anymore? I like going to the movies. I have little kids now, and I like to take them to just to go to the movies and eat popcorn. But why not have a consumption tax? And there was a lot of talk 20 years ago about. There's a great book that Neil Bortz wrote. And I think he lives
Radio
in
guy.
Naples.
He does. He lives in Naples and broadcasts his show he's broadcast North America wide from his condo in Naples.
Yeah. And when I was in Lynchburg, Virginia, I couldn't get Rush Limbaugh up there. So when it was lunchtime, I'd go in my Jeep and eat lunch. I'd listen to Neil Bortz, and he talked a lot about the fair tax. He's got a great book called The Fair Tax, and it's a quick read, but it makes you really rethink, the federal income tax versus fair tax, and what are we really doing? Are we punishing behavior that is good for society? Are we encouraging bad behavior? Or are we encouraging good behavior? And I think that when you read that book, you start to realize that there's something called an embedded tax, not just in the income tax, which is the focus of his book, but there's an embedded property tax that we all pay. So if I go to the grocery store and I buy a product, well, I guess a grocery store, a lot of the items in grocery stores are tax free. If I go to Costco and I buy a new set of tools, there's an embedded property tax in that set of tools, because Costco has to pay a property tax in order to even sell tools. And most of the people watching are probably like, why would you buy tools at Costco? I picked a bad example. I was thinking trampoline first.
You buy a lot of tools. That's what you do at Costco.
So Home Depot, right? Yeah. Or Lowe's or Ace or Grainger, I don't know. So there's an embedded property tax in everything that we're buying. And if you got rid of that embedded property tax, meaning if you didn't charge a property tax, didn't levy a property tax, didn't pay some government bureaucrats, a whole team of government bureaucrats to try to figure out the value of some real estate that's not on the market, that will never be on the market. There's an embedded property tax there that if you eliminated it, could be passed on to the employer, the employees, or the consumer. And then that could be made up with a proportionate increase in a consumption tax. So we're not asking people to pay any more money than they're currently paying. And there's definitely ways to cut government spending, and I'm all in favor of that. I think the governor's in favor of that. But we shouldn't kid ourselves that if we increase a consumption tax, that somehow the price of goods is going to be more expensive than what we were paying before.
Right. Yeah, I was going to focus on that, on alternatives to property tax. I'm glad you touched on that. Is there any other ideas you think that could be floated around there that would help, local governments still have revenues that they desperately need, especially how they affect our homeowners?
Sure, there's use taxes. I mean, I met somebody last year I went to a function in Orlando for counties, an association of counties, and there was somebody that I met there that apparently has an entire business model wrapped around building bridges, private sector bridges. And they just fund the bridges and the construction through tolls. And they issue bonds, and that's so there's private capital out there to literally build roads. And if you want to talk to your local government about the costs of doing government, they'll say, well, what about the roads? Well, there's literally private companies that will build roads.
And I guess from a consumption standpoint, thinking about it, that's a great perspective, the Home Depot model. That translates to hotels. If there is an embedded property tax when you spend a night in a hotel. So you could make that up with a higher room rate tax and collect the money from people visiting our state instead of Floridians in their own homes as well.
Absolutely. And not to oversell how much that tax is. I mean, it's a large number. But I think what's really important as well is our homesteads are locked in. We have Florida Save Our Homes. It's great. So as long as I stay in that same house and don't leave, my property taxes are only going to go up a top 3% a year.
Right.
The problem is that hotel doesn't have Save Our Homes. So when the property values go up, that hotel, that second home, that business, those prices, those taxes are going up 20, 30, 40% in a single year. And we've seen a lot of that happen year over year over year. So even though the homes and the vast majority of voters aren't feeling it, whether it's through their escrow, which a lot of times they don't even see it in their escrow, it's maybe $100 bump. If their taxes go kind of crazy, $100 bump every month, which is still unacceptable for a lot of people. But you don't know that, that grocery store down the street, that Home Depot down the street, that hotel that you work at, their property taxes might have seen a six-figure increase in one single year. And where's that money coming from?
Yeah.
That money's going to get passed on to the consumer. And so we're sitting here complaining like, well, why does it cost so much to go to a fast food restaurant? Well, we got a couple different factors, and property taxes is one of those factors.
Yeah. Was that your impetus for, I think there was another bill you filed, 1092, for the homestead property assessments? Was that the motivation behind that bill, the language in that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I can look it up real quick.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. 1092, same idea, is we need to make sure that we need to make sure that our property taxes, if we're still going to play by this game, that they're not taking advantage, that the counties and the school districts aren't taking advantage of the individuals who live in these homes.
Okay.
The base exemption has not really been increased. It definitely has not kept up with inflation and the cost of homes. We should have exemptions on our homestead properties into the six figures at this point, if we kept those exemptions moving with inflation.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we got to protect homeownership. Homeownership is a key to prosperity and to success in our country. You can find that people who don't own a home don't have an opportunity to succeed. They don't have equity in a house to borrow against if they want to go out and start a business. One of the big problems that we've had in our country for a couple of decades is the student loan issue. Obviously people take out student loans. I took out student loans. Many of my friends took out student loans. You pay them back, right? The problem is a lot of the universities have been taking advantage of just increasing the cost of going to school. Even our publicly subsidized universities have just been wildly increasing the cost of going to school, which has been driving up those student loans, which has basically made it impossible for anybody, even with the student loan forgiveness programs from the government. It's been impossible to buy a house, even go out and buy a house, qualify to buy a house, because your debt to income ratio is so out of whack that you can't even qualify to buy a starter house until you're like 35, 40 years old because you've been paying student loans the whole time.
Yeah.
So we got to deal with that. But the property taxes is something that we can deal with on the local level, the state level, that would make homeownership more affordable. And once you have that opportunity to buy a house, build equity, you have the ability to live the American dream, whether it's taking equity out to buy a second house that you can earn income from, or a vacation house, whether it's starting a business, whether it's taking equity to pay for your kids to start a business or go to college, so that they don't get stuck with student loans like you did. I think there's a lot that we have to do on the local and state level to make sure we protect the American dream.
And last question on property tax before we move on to other legislative items. So what could a path to some finality of this, and I say finality being the transformative change, either massive homestead exemption cap or the true elimination of property tax, but true reform to the way we're thinking about it. What could the timeline look like given study needs to take place? The legislature only meets for 60 days a year, governor's termed up, referendum if it's going to that. So what could this look like to a path to, I say, prosperity of no property tax? Because as home builders, my belief, and John, I believe the same, our business, our economy would go gangbusters if there was massive property tax reform, if the whole concept's upended. So what could a timeline for this look like?
So this is what would have to happen. First of all, this can't just be done with a statute. So we can't completely eliminate property taxes with a statute. That would have to take place with a constitutional amendment, because we're telling local governments how to collect money. So if we're going to do anything affecting or eliminating or pulling back assessments on property to fund local government, we would have to put that on the ballot in the 2026 election. In order to do that, there's a couple different ways you can do it. There's obviously the Constitutional Revision Commission. They're not meeting in the next year, so it wouldn't go through that process. The other process is getting petitions signed. I don't think we need to do that. It'd be a heavy lift. There's obviously new law that's dealing with petition gathering as well. But the Senate and the House, if they vote to put it on the ballot, they can do that. So I think that's the reasonable method to deal with this. And that's why I think the study is really important. And it's important to note that even though the House didn't file a similar bill this year, Speaker Perez put together a committee to study property taxes. They met for the first time the morning of our last day of scheduled session. So there's currently a committee that's out there. They had a second committee meeting last week, I believe. There's a report that was done by the entity that my bill had requested to do a study. It was a very brief study. It had some slides. You can watch that presentation on the Florida channel, and you can pull up that report from the committee meeting as well. But what I think we need to do to land the plane, that's the timeline. But to land the plane, we got to come up with a good policy. And there's a couple of different discussions that are currently taking place regarding how to do this. One is just the flat out elimination of property taxes, not replacing it with something else. I don't think that's going to fly. I think we have a tremendous amount. We have massive budgets in all of our counties, and you can look at that slide, look at those stats. Anywhere from a third to half of the county budgets, and a little bit more so with the cities, comes from property taxes. So I don't think you're gonna replace that, or that you're gonna eliminate that property tax revenue simply by cutting costs in local government, especially in the schools. So you have to look. So any conversation that's realistic has to look at a replacement. It doesn't have to be 100% replacement, but a sizable replacement. And I think consumption tax is the best thing. People talk about taxing, having tourists, having non-permanent residents pay their fair share. Well, there you go. I mean, that's it. Who eats at our most expensive restaurants and stays at our most expensive hotels?
Yeah.
Those are the visitors. Those are people that aren't going to vote me out of office if I raise a consumption or if there's a consumption tax replacement. And you got to be really careful about talking about raising taxes, because in order to raise a tax, first of all, you're going to take a lot of political arrows, as you should. But also, any tax increase requires an additional. It requires 60% vote in the legislature as opposed to a simple majority. So I think a consumption tax, because the state already collects it, is a very efficient way to do it. Just have the businesses change the cash registers, change the calculator, or change the math on the calculator. A lot of people purchase through online products now, through Amazon or other delivery services, and that sales tax is already collected, and it's a check given directly to Tallahassee, monthly or quarterly. So you're not increasing the cost of doing business if you do that. But you're actually making business much more efficient, because now that business no longer has to either agree or fight what the property assessment is before they're paying the government. And then secondly, like what we talked about, there's that embedded property tax that you're going to be eliminating completely. So the cost of a good isn't going to actually increase. You're going to keep the cost of goods very, very closely aligned with what they currently are if you replace the property tax even with a consumption tax. So I think we have to have that understanding in order to and then you got to deal with the counties, because right now all the counties all have property appraisers and property assessors, tax collectors. So they're collecting the taxes for their own real estate, their own property in their own counties. Well, a county like Lee County compared to Hendry County has a lot more car dealerships. We have more shopping centers. We're going to collect more sales tax because a lot of people from Hendry County are going to move over, or they're going to drive to Lee County to do their shopping.
Sure.
So you got to figure out a way to capture that money and make sure that it finds its way back to those other counties. But Glades County and Hendry County, for example, you might argue that they're going to see a loss because they can no longer tax their property. Well, a lot of their real estate is actually agriculture or government land to begin with, so they're not even collecting a lot of tax revenue on that land. So it's not going to be as hard of a reshuffling of the deck as I think a lot of people might think. So that's why we need to study. We need to get everybody together to talk about the pros and cons and ask these same questions that you guys are asking. But I think it's very doable, especially because, and again, this is the big reason that brought this to my attention was for those of us that we cut a check every year to pay for our property insurance and our property taxes, or if we escrow, like the vast majority of homeowners put those taxes and insurance in escrow every single year, and then the bank kind of cuts the check once a year. We've been talking a lot about property insurance, as we should, because property insurance has gotten really expensive. But we haven't been talking about the fact that the government has been increasing taxes at the same rate, if not higher, than our property insurers.
Sure, because it's blind. They say they don't change millage, and
they're not raising taxes, right?
They're not raising taxes.
Except my taxes keep going up somehow.
The values go up and up. Exactly.
All these conservatives that don't want to, that say they're not increasing my taxes, somehow find a way to increase my taxes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think by looking at home ownership and the cost of home ownership holistically, it was time to move away from 100% focusing on property insurance and bring in another big piece of the puzzle, which is property taxes. And that's kind of what brought me to this component.
And the property tax thing's fascinating. There's so much more to talk about when we do part 2 of our interview with Senator John Martin.
Yeah, and for our listeners, be sure to subscribe so you don't want to miss what's next. And know this also, mark it on your calendar, July 24th through the 26th, Ryan and I will be doing the build-up live from the Southeast Building Conference, SCBC, held here in Kissimmee at the Gaylord Palms Resort. If you're planning to attend, please stop by and see us then.
And that's a wrap on this episode of The Build-Up, brought to you by the Florida Home Builders Association. Keep the conversation going, and we'll catch you next time.